quiso adherir el tema en la historia, aseverando que existían en la antigüedad personas de ese tipo. El activista conservador Knowles le hizo saber del error de su creencia mediante el uso del sentido común y lo verás en este video. En él, un activista progre quiso defender su ideología, sin embargo, le salió el tiro por la culata. Mira el video completo y dime si Knowles tiene razón o no y si antes habías escuchado el sustento que usa la tía progre. Empecemos.
Before I state my question, I just want to honor that we are all standing on the land that belongs to the Ojibwe Anishinaabe people.
Thank you for mentioning that. I meant to mention that at the beginning of my speech, but I'm glad that
Dakota, Northern Cheyenne, and they have been here for time immemorial, and so that leads into my question. So you make the statement that must be eradicated from public life entirely, and so I'm going to ask you a question about that, but prior to that, I want to just state that for 5,000 years BC, Gala transcribed and androgynous priests of Sumerian goddesses have been around and noted. 200 to 300 years before Christ in ancient Greece, there were gods worshipped by Gali priests who wore feminine attire and identified as women. Since we are standing on Anishinaabe land, Turtle Island, which is the nation that we live under, has
I don't live under Turtle Island.
Right, well, maybe you should read a little more Indigenous knowledge books. Indigenous communities have used two-spirit personas for the entirety of their culture, and so that leads me to my question. When you say that must be eradicated from public life entirely, I ask you, Mr. Knowles, how can we eradicate something that has been here as long as humans have?
Well, yeah, there have been all sorts of crazy, terrible ideas for a very long time, too. You're pointing to civilizations that committed human sacrifice, okay? You're saying that some ancient pagan tribe worshipped demons and therefore we need to cast children. That's not a good argument. Yes, that's true. There were all sorts of terrible tribes. In fact, as recently as a little over 500 years ago, the Aztecs here in the Western Hemisphere 80,000 people in a sacrifice to one of the demons that they worshipped within the span of 4 days. That's not a recommendation of doing that. I don't think that we ought to consider it. Though, unfortunately, in our increasingly pagan and liberal culture, we do commit human sacrifice to the tune of 800,000 babies a year sacrificed through abortion, and it would make the Aztecs blush what we do. But that doesn't make it the right thing. You refer to a notion that is increasingly popular on the left, which is the idea of the two-spirit among various indigenous tribes. That is not real. That is a contrivance of white liberals in America. There have been various conceptions of for all of human history, but the idea of the two-spirited indigenous intuition of some modern living in New York City who's a man who very much desires to be a woman. That is a complete fiction. You will not find that in literature dating very far back. So what does it say about the question itself? The question, regardless of what the ancient Sumerians believed before they chopped up little kids or whatever, is it true? Can a man really be a woman, and can a woman really become a man? We all know that the answer to that question is false. That's why Professor McCloskey pulled out of our debate at the last moment next week, because even a distinguished professor knows, he has the intelligence to know, even if he is identifying himself, that he can't win that debate because the idea is indefensible. So the question becomes, how does one know that someone with the total physical appearance of a man, how can one know that that person really is a woman? Do you have an answer to that question?
How can, to clarify, you're asking how can somebody know if they are a woman?
And how can I know if that person is a woman? If not by the physical attributes, their natural and enduring biological. What's the alternative to that? So my response to you is then a question of, what is the purpose of knowing another person's identity or but let me finish. Yeah. If it's not for the premise of reproduction, and there's no need to relate outside of that, then I don't quite understand why we would need to question or. So this is what happens whenever you ask a activist to explain even the basic premise of the movement, is they'll immediately say, well, who cares? Why are you so obsessed with this? I'm not obsessed with this. I'm not the one who started sending men into the women's bathroom and taking away their trophies and castrating kids. I'm perfectly happy with the way things have worked for thousands of years. It is the gender activists who are trying to upend everything. And so I think it is at least my right to ask the question, okay, what is the premise of your movement? But they always deflect from that. They always withdraw from the debate. They always try to change the subject because there is no answer. So you ask me, well, what's the purpose of, why do you even care? What's the purpose of knowing someone's biological sex? Well, for starters, because we have civil rights specifically for women in the United States. We have special bathrooms for women, we have special sports leagues for women, we have all sorts of special places and rights and privileges and that are for women that are not for men. So if now some men, the people who at the very least appear to be men, are claiming a right to go into those women's bathrooms, then we either have to abolish all of the special rights and privileges that have existed for women for all of human history and are enshrined in our law, or they need to explain to me how those men are actually women. And they can't do the latter, and I'm not willing to do the former, and I don't think women across this country are willing to do the former, even if a few people have been so ideologically blinded that they would give into this kind of an absurdity.
Quizás sea la primera vez que escuchas acerca de los doble espíritu a los cuales hacen referencia en el video. Los doble espíritu o two-spirit es un término que proviene de las lenguas indígenas de América del Norte y es utilizado por algunas comunidades indígenas para describir a personas que encarnan tanto características masculinas como femeninas o que tienen roles de género que no se adhieren a las categorías binarias tradicionales de masculino y femenino. En muchas culturas indígenas, la identidad de two-spirit se considera sagrada y está asociada con roles ceremoniales y espirituales dentro de la comunidad. Las personas two-spirit a menudo desempeñan funciones importantes en rituales religiosos y ceremonias y su identidad se ve como un don especial. Sin embargo, tal como sustentó Knowles, ello no indica que debamos hacer una copia y pega de todo lo que se hacía en la antigüedad, o que todo lo que ellos hacían debe ser calificado como moralmente correcto. Algunas tribus indígenas practicaban rituales y ceremonias que involucraban sacrificios animales o, en algunos casos, humanos. En algunas sociedades indígenas de América del Norte ha habido registros históricos y antropológicos que sugieren la captura de prisioneros de guerra en contextos de conflicto. Por ejemplo, se sabe que los comanches, una tribu nómada de las grandes llanuras, estuvieron involucrados en conflictos con otras tribus y con colonos europeos. Las prácticas específicas pueden variar, pero algunas fuentes históricas sugieren la captura de prisioneros en contextos de guerra. Las tribus iroquesas, como los Mohawk y los Seneca, que formaron la Confederación Iroquesa, participaron en conflictos con otras tribus y colonizadores europeos. Todo esto se cree que conllevó consigo sacrificios humanos. ¿Y tú qué opinas? Déjamelo saber en los comentarios. Y aquí culmina este video. Si te gustó dale like, comenta y comparte el video. Gracias, hasta luego.